And how did you enter into service in the military?
Kicking and screaming. I guess the thing that sticks out most to me is the fact that most of the time I was unsure of things. I was unsure where I was going. Now, I knew I was going to Vietnam, but I didn't know where I was going in Vietnam.
Yeah, I enlisted in 1960 to get off the family farm to see the world because I was getting tired of just milking cows and hoeing corn, so. There must be other things out there in life besides doing that, you know?
It's kind of a funny story. I was in college at the time, and my boyfriends were getting drafted, and I was getting mad about it. And I thought if they get over to Vietnam and get injured, I want them to have the best care possible. That was me. So I joined the Air Force.
One of my fondest sayings to this day, and I use it fairly regular, if Uncle Sam hadn't drafted me, there's a good chance I'd have never left the county. I'd never been anywhere, really. You know, just there in the hills of Pulaski County in Virginia. But, you know, I remember that well.
It was 1970, and I got a phone call, and the gentleman on the call said, Lieutenant Hanger, I've got good news and bad news. Which one do you want first? And I said, well, give me the good news. And he said, well, you're going to be assigned to Fort Bliss, Texas, in El Paso, and you are going to language school. And I said, well, that's not so bad. You know, then what's the bad news? And he said, well, you're learning Vietnamese because you will be assigned to Vietnam.
I was drafted. Right after college.
Oh, okay.
I knew that once I finished college, my chances of going in were pretty sure. The first draft lottery that was ever done, I was a senior, and that's where they put 65 birthdays in a fishbowl and pulled the birthdays out, and that gave you some idea of when you're going to be drafted. So I was a senior here at VCU, and I can remember driving around in a little Volkswagen one night during this first draft lottery. And my birthday was pulled out somewhere in the teens, maybe the 15th pill that came out. So I knew, you know, I had a deferment. As long as I was in school, I had a deferment. But I knew the minute that I graduated about where I'd be going.
I've always wanted to be in the Army, always.
I wanted to be a cook, because that's what I did. Before I went, I was short on a cook, and I wanted to be a cook. Staff Sergeant Wilson, never forget him. He told me that he'd rather have a sister that was in the house of ill repute, he used another word, than to have a brother that was a cook in the Marine Corps, and I wasn't going to be a little cook. So I went to, corrections school, and got that MOS, But of course, Marines are always what? We're fighters first. You're always 03 first.
When I arrived in Vietnam, it was in 1968. People asked me about that. I told them every day was the 4th of July. There was something that was going on every day. And for the first week, I just sat down and I cried. Because as the helicopters were coming in, they would bring in the wounded and they'd bring in the dead. And we had to separate the clothes, the other things like this. And that was just a secondary part of our job. And then one day, the first sergeant came up to me and he said, Cleveland, when you gonna stop crying and go to work? And I said, you're absolutely right, Tom. I gotta do that. After that, I got myself together to where I could do my job.
Lord have mercy, I told everybody else, I said, from the time I got off that first helicopter, I said, if I had walked a straight line from there to there, I would have walked home. A lot of walking, up and down mountains, in and out of the jungle, over and across rivers.
Well, I would say the monsoon season was what sticks out in my mind. It's an extended rainy season, and we went to work wet, got off wet, went to bed wet, went to eat wet, went back to work the next day wet.
I remember we were getting ready to make this landing in Vietnam, and we had been briefed about how the Amtraks were going to come up out of the water, and this charge would be shot out from the front of the Amtrak, and it would drop on the beach. And once that charge dropped onto the beach, it would explode. And that will open up a path so that if there were booby traps along the beach, all you had to do is run through that path to get to the other side. But I always think back to that charge coming out of the front of the Amtrak, dropping, and it was supposed to explode, but it didn't. And I'm thinking, now we have to run through a minefield? That's something that sticks in my head, and every once in a while, in a quiet moment, I'll start thinking, what if that beach had been mine? But I don't dwell on it. I'm lucky. We're lucky.
One of the, I guess, the worst day of my life was on the 2nd of March, 1968. I was with Delta Company, 4th of the 9th Infantry, and I was there for the ambush at Hoc Mon. And this is where U.S. forces were ambushed, and it was like 48 killed, 27 wounded. It was just a real massacre. And I was just ready to go over the bridge into the kill zone when the automatic weapons fire started, and I dropped back to the ground, and I didn't proceed over the bridge. Everybody that went over the bridge died.
3 Navy guys out of the conning tower. These 3 guys ran out to the helicopter we were going to get on and started pulling out these plastic bags that I realized were body bags. Those were the guys that had gone in just, 15, 20, 30 minutes before us. And I turned and looked around at the younger Marines behind me, and they were all stunned. They were like this, We realized that this was not no fun and games anymore. This was not training. This was the real deal.
I had one of the two Hoys assigned to my platoon, and I wasn't ever sure whether I was going to trust him or not. But in the end, I trusted him fairly well. But anyway, we got to the other side of the river, and he said, "Stop." It was triple canopy jungle, which means you couldn't see anything because there were 3 layers of trees growing over top of each other, so it was pitch dark. And he said, "Stop." He said, "Smell that." And I did smell something strange. He said, "Buku NVA," which means there's a lot of North Vietnamese army here. And I said, "Where?" And he said, "Everywhere." I said, "Geez, here we were on the other side. It was pitch dark." And no sooner had he said that, we didn't realize it, but we had walked into a bunker complex of a North Vietnamese battalion. And that's like 600 or 700 men. And they were dug in bunkers all around us. And we'd walked right into the middle of them.
Helicopter pilots knew I was a newbie, so they fly in the helicopter through the jungle with the skids clipping off of the trees, and we went up and flew around, and then we landed down in this little spot in the jungle. And this guy comes running up to me and he goes, I can't remember his name, I'd love to remember it. He goes, I'm Doc so-and-so. He grabs my hand and he literally pulls me off the helicopter. He said, so-and-so's got malaria, so-and-so's got the clap, so-and-so is a BS artist, good luck. And he jumped on the helicopter and flew away. There I am, standing there in them crisp new jungle fatigues and nice shiny boots, and these guys are all nasty looking and scrungy and everything. And they looked at me and they said, I sure hope you're as good as the last doc we had. That's how it started.
And so I was in medical ICU, so we saw a lot of malaria. We would see them come in with malaria and go through the phases where they can be very, very ill or just a little bit ill. So we had a ward that was just I guess a step-down ward. It was where they would have become more stable in the medical ICU unit and then could be transferred, which they were Quonset huts, our hospital. So there was no air conditioning except in the ICU because we wanted them to be cooler so you could bring down temperatures, especially with malaria, because the temperature would go up very high and then a lot of times they would have seizures.
Our boots were the first in the soil during the 1965 era, October 1965. We put our footprints in the sand and we paid for it. We ended up with I think it was 18% casualty rate, dead, at the end of the first year. And generally speaking, I can give you a rule of thumb. For every death that you have at least 4 seriously wounded. So you can do the math.
We did a lot of, quote, chemical missions, which involved, well, different type things. First, defoliation. You may have heard of Agent Orange. We were the guys at the time that know the impact of Agent Orange because they told us it was harmless to our health. But as it turned out, it wasn't. Many of our guys developed cancer later on in life and other diseases. But anyway, we sprayed it from spray tanks all over the place, wherever the boss wanted it, around fire support bases, along the river to kind of make it difficult for Charlie to bring ambushes on us.
I saw a lot of brave young men. I saw things in the hospital there in Valley Forge that I would have never seen in civilian nursing. We did hand reconstruction. We did thumb reconstructions. I saw a lot of them were from war wounds. Some were self-inflicted, which was another sad part of this war. It was terrible over there, and some couldn't take it, and the one way to get out was shoot off a toe or a thumb.
When the Tet Offensive happened, it got crazy, and every night they were throwing rockets in, and it's almost, you can set your watch to it, about 3 o'clock in the morning, here they came. And it became a war, and then we volunteered with Air Rescue, which was right down the street. It was an Army unit. And we would go out and pick up wounded people and bring them back. And at times, we were under enemy fire, and I remember we were so busy doing what we needed to do that I didn't think much about it. But we would get back to our barracks, and about 7:30, we'd be sitting there, and all of a sudden we'd start shaking because we realized, oh my gosh, we made it back, and this is what went on. Fortunately, I wasn't much of a drinker, so I didn't partake that much, but I can see how guys would suck down a 6-pack of beer like it was nothing, because of what they went through.
And I was on R&R in Bangkok in a restaurant, and soldiers sat down next to me and we were quaffing a root beer, and he said, I feel bad that I'm on R&R here because we have a big operation back in Vietnam. And obviously he could have been wounded or seriously killed. And he says, I'm sorry that I'm not there to help support my buddies. That really got me.
A Dero's calendar counts day by day the year that, and in the case of the Army, the hitch in Vietnam was 1 year. And in my case, it was to the day. I went to Vietnam on 10 December 1968, and I came back on 10 December 1969. And you had a calendar that actually marked it day by day until you reached your return to Benoit, and your Freedom Bird is the name of the airplane. Everyone left on a Freedom Bird and you were going back to the world, which was the United States. But we never said America, we never said the United States. It was always back to the world, because where we were was not where we wanted to be.
They definitely shaped my life. Vietnam is very much a part of who I am. And I've done a variety of things since then, but Vietnam is always there.
Like many veterans that went to Vietnam, where I think we all are still sort of trying to get our arms around those times and how that worked out and what was involved. If asked to go by my country, I would do it again with all the problems. I have my strong feelings about it, about those times, politically and otherwise, and what happened. I'd always hoped that at least the country learned a lot from that experience, and I hope nobody has to go to war. But if this country decides we need to, that we do it for the right reasons in the right ways, and the lessons learned from it.
The GIs who served in Vietnam came back to the United States that was quite hostile to them. We weren't treated the way returning veterans are treated now, which is just great. And I think that all of us who served in Vietnam really appreciate the way the American people treat their veterans now. But it wasn't like that when we came back from Vietnam.
After the initial trip home, I don't think anybody ever said anything to me again. From time to time throughout my life, I've had some ignorant person make some comment about it, but that had a far different impact on me than the immediate impact of coming home, thinking I'd done my job, thinking I'd done my duty, thinking I'd served my country, and to be greeted with people who truly hated not the war, they did that, but they also hated me. I couldn't figure it out.
And we bumped into some old high school friends, and they looked at me and they said, "Hey, good to see you, Jack. You've been sick?" And I realized I'd lost about 25 pounds. I said, no, I'm not sick at all. "Oh, that's great. Yeah, that's good." I said, "I've been in Vietnam." That stopped the conversation. They didn't want to talk anymore. They didn't want to hear about Vietnam.
You know, we were basically ignored for 15 years, which was just fine with us. You know, I was in the Navy at that time. I was an officer. It was fine. I was on a submarine, fine. But then after Desert Storm, all of a sudden, everybody was in love with you. And I appreciate that. When somebody says, "I thank you for your service," I don't sit there, I mean, I do. I say I appreciate it because I knew what it was like back then. So, yeah, I mean, what can I tell you? So,
I don't dwell about Vietnam. I just move on. And the other thing, when I came back, 2 weeks later, I was back in college. Nobody cared about what I had done, where I had been. So you just suck it in and you just move on. And I went to a private liberal arts college that was like typical other colleges in 1968. I just moved on. I did what I was trained to do, and I think I did it very well. And I was lucky enough to survive it. I have no regrets about anything I did in Vietnam.
You think about it every day. I had a friend, and he was over there, and he asked me, do you think of it often? And I said, every day, and his response was the same also. And it's just a year-long thing, you're in it, and it's just, I'm sure with any war, Korea, World War II, you know, those guys think of it every day also.
Yeah, it shaped my life. It showed me that I could be not here in a minute. You know, it taught me to appreciate a lot of things I never appreciated before. You know, the little things in life, like getting up in the morning, you know, going and have a cup of coffee, being able to sleep at night. You know, just a lot of things. I learned a lot in Vietnam, basically about staying alive.
Looking back over the service that I had, it means a great deal to me today. And I've been fortunate. I haven't suffered as a result of my experiences in Vietnam. They were profound, but they didn't affect me in any way that has bothered me, that I'm aware of. I never did anything there that I feel a need to apologize for. Never did anything that I was ashamed of. I did my job to the best of my ability because people's lives were at stake. So I'm proud of the service that I had.
I mumbled to one of my friends that I'd head for Ukraine if I could, but no, I'm beyond that now. I got no business anymore. I stay home and yell at Jeopardy. That's it.
You know, it was just a wonderful experience. As I told someone before, I wouldn't give you a nickel for what happened to me, but you can buy the experience for $1 million. You know, just so glad that I was, you know, an American.
Kennedy was president during part of my lifetime, and he made that famous speech about ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. And I think of that almost daily when I watch the news, you know, and you see people that are kind of self-centered and aren't really thinking about, you know, what's best for the country. And I think of that. I think, you know, I didn't like the draft. I had two brothers who had lottery numbers and fortunately didn't get called because it was about the time the draft ended. But at the same time, I thought, you know, everybody should feel a duty to do something to serve the country. This is a very precious place we live. People are dying literally to get here.